Let's get scratching.
We got an explosive broadcast coming to you. Listen up. Sega games, just keep playing them.
We're back. It's the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show. Get ready for Sega interviews and news with George and Barry. Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show. I'm Barry, with me is George.
Hello.
And with us we have Sam Mullen of SEGA of America. He's a localization producer over there. Hello Sam, thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So you are here to talk to us about the 3D classics, including the recently announced Genesis games, as well as the upcoming Hatsune Miku title for the Nintendo 3DS.
That's right.
So before we get into that, though, I just wanted to step back in time, as I like to do with most guests, and find out what sort of video games and consoles you were into while you were growing up. I did do some research, and it looks like you weren't a Sega boy.
I was not a Sega boy, unfortunately. Had I known that life would lead me to the place that I am, I would have certainly put more effort into it. But yeah, when I was growing up, I started my first console was actually Atari 2600, and I played a lot of that. You know, the great thing about an Atari 2600 though at the time is like literally like a 3-year-old could play something because the games were so simple back then, and they were so abstract that you often didn't know what you were doing. But yeah, I played a 2600, and then I had my parents bought like a little IBM PC Junior, I think in '86, and so I played like a little bit of really early PC games. And after that, and of course I had friends around the neighborhood who were picking up, you know, the NES and all that. So eventually I convinced Santa Claus to bring me a NES. So I played the NES. A couple years after that, SNES came out, got one of those. And then by that point I was starting to get ready to go for college. So I was kind of bumming console time off roommates and whatnot for like the PlayStation 1 and 64 and whatnot.
Nice.
So, but I did have, but there were just going back to Sega. There were kids in the neighborhood who did have. There was definitely a kid up the street who had a Genesis and a Sega CD, and I can't, you know, I did play a little bit of it, but they just weren't my own consoles. So.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how it went. You latched onto friends. Sometimes you know, kids would make friends just because they're like, well, they have a console that's different than mine, so they're the perfect friend to have. I had a friend who had a SNES. I didn't like him, but you know, he had a SNES.
Yeah.
I'm wondering then, how did you get your start in the games industry, and what led to your job at SEGA of America?
So, my start in the game industry. So, back in 2005, I was coming back. I was moving back from Japan off the JET program. And a friend of mine, a high school friend of mine, was living in Hawaii at the time, and she was working on mobile games, like as a mobile game tester. And she had a friend who had recently moved to the mainland into Los Angeles, and that guy was working on mobile games as well. And as I was moving back, I was talking to my friend, and she was like, "Oh, I know a guy who's looking for testers. You know, they want bilingual guys. Are you interested?" I said, "Sure." So I flew into Los Angeles. And interviewed at Bandai for their, like, they had within their this is just before the Bandai Namco merger, so it was still Bandai they still have Bandai games, but I was technically working in Bandai of America, which is actually the toy group. They had like a little mobile game group in there. I interviewed and I got a tester job and moved out to California, started working there. Within a couple months, they needed some more project management types, so they upgraded me from tester to a project manager. And then I just started kind of working on that. This is before the iPhone existed. This is back in the dark ages when the Motorola Razr was the hot phone at the time, and that is not a device to be making video games for, guys. It was a rough start. But from there, a couple years went on, and I had an opportunity to move over to Atlas, and I worked at Atlas for a couple years doing localization stuff. And then in late 2009, I I just got a job offer from Sega. They were looking for more bilingual localization producers. So said, hey, let's do that. So moved up here, and I've been in San Francisco ever since for 5 years.
Oh wow! So what are the responsibilities of your job? And because I know we've spoken to former producers at Sega, and they've told us a bit about what a producer does. But how does a localization producer differ, or are there differences?
Well, within Sega, a producer is sort of a producer is a producer is a producer. The only real difference is that a normal producer is one that kind of manages game development within the region that they're stationed in. A localization producer just simply deals with localization that's based in another region. So I specialize in working with Japan. So all the games that I work on are developed in Japan. And either that means that I'm working on like a West-funded game that's being developed in Japan, or I'm working on a game that was funded and built in Japan for the Japanese audience, and I'm trying to bring it outside to Western markets. So so my basic core responsibility is like kind of doing day-to-day, talking to Japan, making sure schedules are being met, making sure all of my QA teams and all those people have the knowledge of the game that they need to have, reviewing text. Making sure not too much time or money is being used to get something done. It's a management job. It's a project management job.
Interesting. George.
Yeah, I'm just gonna skip this first question because it's obvious the answer to that one. But what's it like working with SEGA of Japan, SEGA of Europe, and SEGA of America when it comes to localizing titles?
So every company in every region has like a slightly different flavor. So one of the challenges in working across regions is not only is there sometimes a language difference, but the time difference actually is really kind of wild as well. Sometimes when you need to ask somebody something, they're not online because it's like 12 o'clock at night there and they've all gone home. So it's all about making sure you're using your time effectively. And making sure you're, looking past any language barriers that pop up and being very open-minded and very understanding. But yeah, they're good people. People in Europe are really great people. People in Japan are really talented, really great people as well.
Okay, we've had already 2 waves of the 3D Classic series for the 3DS. What made Sega go forward and announce these last 3 titles they just announced?
Well, also, I think, George, too, we want to know how did the series start off, too?
Yeah,
how did the series start off?
So the series started off back quite a while ago. I think this series actually got, sort of brought on board. Oh, goodness. Going back, I'm having the time kind of thing. It's a long time ago, back in 2011-ish, maybe 2012, and it was actually all part of this, get SEGA content onto 3DS. So if you guys may recall, there's a whole bunch of Game Gear titles that you can get on the 3DS too, virtual console titles, and these are just straight up virtual console ports. They're just Game Gear games on your 3DS, and those were actually done by M2 as well. And as part of that package, the Sega West onboarded these 3D conversions, and at the time it was being worked on by a separate. It wasn't being worked on by me. It was by a completely separate producer. So I don't actually know any of the details about how it got brought on board. But around early 2012, there was some shuffling, and then I got assigned this 3DS project because I had previous experience working with him too on the Sega Vintage Collection 3 project, which is some more ports, some classic ports for Xbox 360 and PS3. I highly recommend you check them out. It's really cool.
It's a great series, by the way.
Yeah, that's all M2 as well. So you can tell because those games as well have all those extra modes in them and the leaderboards and all kinds of little quirky stuff in them. But yeah, so I started working on these 3D classic titles, and at the time, I'd been working on M2 stuff up until then, and when the project was handed over to me, I didn't actually quite have a good idea about like what this was being handed to me, I was just thinking, you know, probably like what honestly a lot of people think. A lot of people think, oh, they're just virtual console games, oh, and they have some stereoscopic 3D thrown in them. Okay, whatever, big deal, right? So I'm working on these games. I'm getting them submitted into Nintendo, and we got them scheduled to be launched at the end of 2013. And sometimes I have questions about these games, right? Like I'm like working on the translation. There's some like weird text that pops up like upright arcade box or whatever, right? There's like and some things in the options. I'm like, or what was it? Like the PSG emulation thing, right? Like how they emulate, the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 stuff separately. And so I'd be like, I don't understand what this is. So I would email Okanai-san, the producer over at SOJ, and I'd be like, hey man, like what is this referring to, or why is this significant? And then he would be constantly emailing me back, and like, oh well, we discussed it in this interview. Here's the reference, here's the link, right? And I would go and look at these interviews to find specifically what he was talking about so I could get my question answered. But I would notice, I'm like, man, these interviews look like they're really interesting. I should go back and read these through at some point because they look interesting. And then a little as we're getting closer to the release dates, probably like an October timeframe, Julian, our community manager, comes by and he's all like, hey, I'm trying to come up with ideas about what we should do to promote these games. And I said very offhanded to him, I'm like, oh, well, there are these interviews that apparently SOJ did. Maybe I should translate one, and maybe it's a good blog thing to do. And he's like, okay, sure. So I picked up the what was actually the last one, the Streets of Rage interview, and I just translated like one page of it, right? And by the end of that first page, I was like, holy crap, these things are amazing. We're going to have to translate all of them. Because I'd already noticed in the first article that even the first page, they were making back references to previous articles. So I knew I couldn't just translate the one or two. I'd have to actually translate them all to get them, because it obviously told a story all the way through. So we started translating these articles. Went back to the very beginning. I went back to Space Harrier and started translating it from top down. And all of a sudden, just by reading these interviews, these games, which I thought were just virtual console games with 3D thrown into them, became this whole new experience. It became not only about just like the classic game itself, but like what went into making the game. Why is this game significant? What are the troubles of putting 3D into a game because it's not simple? What about all these extra modes and all these this thought that M2 put into these games? And it took me on this amazing trip through this first batch. And when I got done with it, I was like, oh, I want to be able to share this with everyone else. I want to make sure that everyone has the same kind of experience that I did learning about these games in depth. And that's how the first batch came on board.
How long did it kind of take you to translate, probably like the first wave of interviews?
So I kind of killed myself to do that one. And I started probably translating in October, and I remember I was finishing up the last couple, like when the first couple games were being launched. So it took a couple months.
I don't think people understand that, translating takes, sometimes a long time, especially to get it correct.
Yeah.
Barry, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, so what sort of work goes into bringing these titles to the West on your end? I know, for example, Streets of Rage goes by a different title in Japan, so there's that sort of difference. But could you walk me through the localization process?
Right. So the localization of the game itself isn't actually that much work at all. The text is pretty reused from one game to the next. The only thing you have to really add in is stuff that's specific to that particular game, or like if M2 decides they want to rework the UI, then sometimes there's like little changes to the UI. Like if you go back and play Space Harrier and you compare that to like a late Batch 2 title, you notice the UI has kind of evolved over time. But the localization, the game itself is actually not hardly any work. What actually ends up being a lot of work is the manual, the e-manuals. The e-manuals are always, on any game, anytime you guys buy a game, please open the e-manual and at least thumb through it, because it's shocking how much work those are to actually do, and a lot of people don't actually spend the time to read them. But the e-manuals are are a huge cost, and you're a huge time suck, because if you translate them into multiple languages, it takes a lot of work to get that done. But the games themselves, it's just a matter of kind of, bringing them on board, putting the time in to get the strings swapped out, and just sort of the red tape and everything it takes to just kind of get a game out in the first place.
So I'm wondering too, this isn't a question here, but I don't think it's too controversial. With the Genesis titles, obviously it's the Mega Drive in Europe. Is there any difference between the American and European releases for the Genesis games? And the
sometimes we have different. Sometimes we have different strings for like certain things. But generally we try to kind of keep them as close. We try not to. There's not so much in there that requires that sort of localization, because M2 tends to just like throw every single version into the game. However, that said, like for example, in the upcoming Streets of Rage 2 release, the European version uses the European ROM, which is slightly different because it uses the Roman numeral 2, and the American version will actually use the ROM from the American release, which uses the numeral 2. Oh, wait a minute, guys. There's a stranger walking around my office. What is this guy? I thought we had security on our doors. How did they let people like you in? Oh, that's scary. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like our office is being invaded by the illustrious Aaron Weber.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Come here, Aaron.
What are we doing? Is it a podcast?
Yeah, we've got you.
Yeah, we're doing a podcast.
Hey.
What's up, guys?
How you doing, Aaron?
Doing well. How about you?
Good.
We're doing pretty good. We're just talking about 3DS titles.
Ooh, nice.
We got that Sonic.
So what are you doing around there, Aaron?
I actually visit the office every now and then just for fun.
Certainly.
Fridays are good days. You told me about the stuff that was given away and all that stuff, right? Yeah.
Half the licensing.
They're like, we're going to throw this stuff out. I'm like, no, this is really special Sega merchandise and history from the last 20 years. You can't throw it away. And they're like, well, someone's got to take it. So every now and then I'll just come in and grab stuff and take it home and store it somewhere. I don't even have enough space for this stuff, but I don't want to see it get thrown out. So whenever you guys want some stuff, let me know.
Can you tell me some of the stuff you got?
Yeah. There was a giant Sonic. I think it was from Sonic Unleashed, like a giant Sonic wall art piece that was done on it was a vinyl. It was really nice, high quality stuff, and it's probably 10 feet long. It's wrapped up. It's huge. There was a Skies of Arcadia Dreamcast original poster that I picked up, and I was really happy to have that. Stephen Frost actually grabbed that for me because I was a big Skies of Arcadia fanboy. A ton of old classic Sonic licensing stuff. It's very random stuff, but just a whole bunch of it. And then I think there was something that was like a Virtua Fighter promotional piece. It said I think it was Fighting Game 1993 or something like that. I think that's Virtua Fighter. Anyway, there's a whole mix of stuff, and maybe someday we'll have to show it off. But yeah, it was pretty cool.
Interesting. Well, hey, if you have any
I'm gonna kick you out.
to scan,
this is my show. This is not the Aaron Weber show. Get out of here.
Anyway, back to Sam. Geez, I'm sorry about that. Well, now I'm going to have to put his name very large above yours in the graph. No,
I know, right? I know. It's totally stealing my thunder.
Oh, man. It's like those bad direct-to-DVD movies where they have the actor who plays a 5-minute role and all of a sudden becomes the star just because it's one of his oldies.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Unfortunately, we can't have Aaron Weber, right?
We could try.
We can try.
Anyway,
what were we talking about?
Try.
We were talking about 3D Classics.
Yes, George actually had a question about the developer interviews.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, he answered the first question. He's really good. I mean, you got ahead of the questions. But can we expect future translated developer interviews for the next couple games that are coming out?
So for the following 3 games, yeah, so Okanai-san and Horei-san do continue to do those interviews. Whether we're going to be able to deliver them, we kind of approach them on a case-by-case basis. I would certainly I would hope they will be able to supply that, but it kind of depends on how things kind of pan out. The difficult thing this time around is because in the past there's been a huge gap between the Japanese releases and the American releases. So the Japanese version comes out and there's interviews and then there's like months of time and then the North American versions come out. This time it's a little bit more difficult because the releases are so much closer together that even if we try to do some of the interviews, we might not be able to get them translated in time in the same way we have in the past. So, but nothing's decided yet. We'll have to see what happens.
Have you ever thought about I don't know, like doing like your guys' own interviews or fan questions from the West?
Oh yeah, we've thought about it.
And my next question is, what led you guys to pick Sonic 2, Streets of Rage 2, and Gunstar Heroes? I mean, I would consider those games to be more, I guess, especially Sonic 2 and Streets of Rage 2 more popular in the West compared to like the arcade games are popular in Japan, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the whole concept. So for the second batch, when that project was originally kind of brought online, we didn't actually plan to bring that out in America. So that was not, or out overseas rather, and that's why they're all arcade games, because the idea was that Japan wanted to do a second series and focus on what they felt the Japanese population wanted to play, and arcades are much more popular in Japan in a broader sense than the home consoles were, which is the opposite of how it's the opposite of how it works over here. Where over here, yes, the arcades were popular, but not nearly as popular as Sega's home console stuff. So the second batch was designed to just really satiate that sort of Japanese nostalgia for the arcade communities. However, when we decided to bring the games over here, we're like, look, if we're going to go through trouble doing this all over, get M2 back on board to start working on games again, let's make sure that we add in a little bit more Genesis games, because on the first batch, there's a notable difference between the first batch's arcade titles and the Genesis stuff. The Genesis stuff, everyone eats that stuff up over here. So we wanted to make sure we had some Genesis titles as well, so we commissioned M2 to add those 3 titles. And to answer your question as to why those were chosen, well, just like you said, those are very popular titles for us. You can go back and look at performance on like the old Virtual Console games, and we released those for the Wii, and Streets of Rage 2, Gunstar Heroes, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 stand ahead above a lot of the other titles that we have out.
Interesting. I'm wondering then, what sort of work was involved in lining up I wouldn't say so much a multi-region announcement, but they definitely came very closely. In fact, I believe the American announcement came before Japan.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, because it was at that point, it was a coordinated effort, and yeah, we just knew that they were coming, and it hadn't been announced in Japan yet, so we decided to kind of just do one of those round-the-clock sort of things where, we announce it here, it's the middle of the night in Japan, and then when they come online, then bam, when they come online in the morning, that's our evening, so then we get that second kind of push news media because the Japanese announcements go out. So yeah, it was just really well timed for us.
And aside from being Genesis Mega Drive titles, the 3 games you guys picked also have something in common, which is co-op. So I'm wondering, can we expect to see 2-player features in some fashion with these games?
So Streets of Rage 2 does support multiplayer, and I'm pretty sure. I mean, because that's built basically at this point, it's built into the Giga Drive, as they call it, the multiplayer support. I don't know if they've announced either way on the next 2 titles, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut on that one.
Okay, fair enough. Another question I had too. M2 has a history with Gunstar Heroes. I don't know, maybe George, you can correct me, but don't they? Aren't some of them former staff of Treasure?
Yeah. There's a lot of former Treasure guys.
So they actually worked on the Japanese title Sega Ages 2500 series, Volume 25, Gunstar Heroes Treasure Box, which is kind of a mouthful. Can we expect to see features from this release carried over? I know the Sega Ages version had a prototype version of the game.
Right. So the Sega Ages collection series essentially works under sort of a. So each one, every time you build one of these packages, you have to have a theme, right? You have to you have to go and you have to set a scope. You can't just throw everything in the kitchen and the kitchen sink unless that's literally the thing you're shooting for. So for these releases, the goal really is to deliver that, polished 3D implementation for a Genesis title that we would expect from M2. So the plan isn't to have any of those extra, because the treasure box collection is literally let's find every single Gunstar Heroes thing that we possibly can and put it all into this one package. That was the Gunstar Heroes treasure box thing. So that's not really the goal for this one. Another important thing to remember too is that the PlayStation 2 is also a more powerful machine than the 3DS. And so there's limitations that are associated with that as well.
Right, of course. Interesting.
I have a question. Sonic 2, you guys did a Sonic 2 remasters on mobile, and they had new features, like you guys had new playable characters like Knuckles. Can we see are M2 looking at those versions of those games when they're doing their 3D Sonic the Hedgehog 2?
I know that they're, of course, M2 is aware of that release, and don't quote me on this. I'm not totally super familiar with the Sonic mobile version, but if I remember correctly, I think that's actually built from scratch, and not emulated, right? So when you build something from scratch, a great example is Fantasy Zone 2 W is a great example of that. That's what you can do when you build something from scratch. The Sonic the Hedgehog 2. 3D Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is it will be an emulated title, so it's running on the Giga Drive, so that limits with the sort of stuff that they're able to change in that. But it'll still have all the stuff that you would expect M2 to kind of bring to the table. Don't worry.
All right. How does localizing a 3D title from arcade to the Sega Genesis 3D Classic, how does that differ?
So, so the Genesis is actually, my understanding is Genesis is kind of it's kind of difficult to, well, not difficult, that's not the right word. It's more tricky to emulate Genesis than it is arcade hardware. So, and because of that, I think maybe M2 had a little bit more freedom with the sort of arcade stuff. They had a little bit, if you go back and read the interviews, you can see how much trouble they actually have getting a lot of stuff to work. Because of the limitations of the 3DS. Not that the 3DS is a weak piece of hardware, but there's just certain types of things it's not particularly good at when you're trying to emulate arcade hardware on it. But in addition to that, the Genesis has a lot of things that you've got to kind of put in there, and I think M2 actually has a little bit more experience. They have maybe not more experience, but they have a lot of experience working with the arcade stuff. In some ways, I think they're more familiar with it. But the Genesis stuff, it's just trickier because there's more constraints in which you have to kind of operate. Also, the game design really makes a difference too. So, for example, for the Super Scalar games, the stuff that's flying, when you're flying into the screen. For example, you can add widescreen to that pretty easily because ultimately the sides of the screen don't affect gameplay because it's just like stuff flying by your head. But in a game like Streets of Rage or Sonic the Hedgehog, if you widen the screen out, then that affects the game balance because you've got to adjust for when enemies are going to be spawning on screen. That's stuff that the Genesis doesn't even have the capability to even display that kind of stuff because of the hardware limitations. So it's different. It's very different.
All right. I was going to say M2 has been, improving as they've been releasing titles, especially with the extras they add in each title. Mm-hmm. What can we expect? What can you talk about of new features in the upcoming Sega Genesis remasters or re-releases?
Right, so they kind of pull out all the stops when it comes to those arcade the arcade games because there's a lot more freedom to work within, I think, because of the hardware. So the Genesis games always have to, at the end of the day, they have to run on a Genesis. So some of the stuff that they can swap in or swap out is somewhat limited. But at the same time, it's still, there's going to be, at least one new mode, new feature. The big thing right now is that they like to add in at least two things. One is like some way to mix up the gameplay, and some way to make the game kind of easier without just simply adjusting the difficulty. So you'll get at least one of those two things in every game.
I'm wondering, in regards to Gunstar Heroes, does Sega have to get approval from Treasure in regards to adding things to the re-release, or even re-releasing it in general?
I'm actually not really sure on that.
Okay, because I do know Gunstar. What's the Guardian Heroes? Didn't that come out? Yeah.
We brought that out on, what was that, like a Xbox 360?
Right. So it seems like Sega's pretty either chummy with Treasure, or it's just incredibly easy to release their titles. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is also probably a little bit of M2 magic as well. But like anything that ran on Genesis at some point, Sega has inroads into how to get that stuff out again if they want to.
Okay. Huh. This is a more technical question. I wasn't sure if you knew the answer, but thought we'd throw it out there. In an old interview that you guys posted with M2, you talk about how hard it is to do action side-scrolling in 3D, and the reason that Streets of Rage 1 made it into the 3D classics was that it didn't have a faux perspective. So I'm wondering what has changed since then, if you can answer the question.
It's basically just M2 has gotten much better at it. So back when the 3D Classic project was actually originally bootstrapped, the Gunstar Heroes and Streets of Rage 2 were actually originally on the list of games to be released in batch 1. But at the time, basically M2 was like, we can't do these games. There's too many unknowns, and we just don't think we can get them running. It's not that they don't think that we can't get it running. It's that we don't know how difficult it's going to be, so it's hard for us to put a price tag on it.
Right.
So, but after working on 13 other titles, now they're kind of like, oh yeah, we can make this work now. We know the work that needs to be done, and we know what it's going to take. So let's give it a try now. So originally, Streets of Rage 2 and Gunstar Heroes were knocked off the list and replaced by other titles. But they're back because they wanted to do them in the first place.
Very cool. So I think we're going to move on to our next title that we're going to be talking about, still for the 3DS. We should probably be a little quiet, though, because if Aaron hears us talking about it, he might burst into the room. George, do you want to field the first question?
Hatsune Miku Project Mirai DX on the 3DS, set to release late May in the US and Europe, continuing the long trend of Hatsune Miku titles releasing outside of Japan. What challenges did Sega face when making this decision to localize Miku games?
For Miku games, the main thing was is the demand there. I mean, when it comes to Miku, back when we originally started working with Hatsune Miku, it was just not really being aware of what the market was like for the property and how popular she's going to be. But over the past two years, she's definitely got a lot more mainstream presence. People kind of know who she is, especially the younger crowd. She's had a concert. They had Miku Expo last year in October, which was really amazing. And now that we've got two Hatsune Miku games under our belt here in West, it's less of an unknown, and we kind of know what to expect.
All right, Miku's Western success is no doubt helped by the franchise's devoted fan base. How has it been interacting with fans in shows and at events?
Oh, Miku fans are the best. They're the best. Miku brings a really creative, upbeat crowd. They love the content because it's all built by the fans. It's all built by the collaboration. I love working on Hatsune Miku just because the fans are amazing.
Um, okay, you guys releasing that Project Mirai DX. How is that different from Project Mirai 2 that was released in Japan?
So how is DX different from Mirai 2? That's a great question. So the differences, so for those who are not aware, in Japan, there's been two games in the Project Mirai series to date. Project Mirai Future Stars, I think it was, and then Project Mirai 2. Project Mirai 2 released back in November of 2013. And there were a lot of significant changes between Mirai 1 and Mirai 2. Like the gameplay, a lot of things changed because there was a lot of feedback to Japan on how to make the first one better, and they onboarded all that stuff and made Mirai 2. The first game didn't have so many songs in it, but the second game not only had all the old songs, but it had a whole bunch of new songs, and I think Mirai 2 had 47 songs total in it, with 3 difficulties and 2 ways to play the game. So for Mirai DX, they're adding a new song. There's actually a lot. At face value, it looks very similar. Like if you just booted it up and looked at the main menu and just like tabbed through the menus, you would make the mistake of actually think it's basically the same game. But not only is there a new song, they've also added in they swapped in a lot of the videos. So a lot of the videos have been remade. They've added new mini games in. They've added more costumes. They've added in more player cards, more Street Pass stuff into it. You can play this thing called Miku Versi, which is it's like Othello, basically, if you know what that is. And it's super fun. It's like one of my favorite things to do in it. So yeah, there's a ton of like stuff under the hood, like new Easter eggs, stuff that wasn't in there in the original game.
Cool. So if someone were to have imported the old one, this one's definitely worth picking up.
This one's definitely worth picking up. If they imported the old one, I think in the Japanese version, there's actually a data import feature. So if you have the Japanese version and you get the Japanese version of DX, you can actually import your data and kind of upgrade. But you obviously can't do that because for the American version because there's no Mirai 2. But still, it's definitely it's certainly worth checking out. There's a lot of gameplay balance stuff that went in. They added in all these like new help items and new ways to change the way that the HUD works. Oh, it's just like it's such an elegantly designed and built piece of software. I can't believe we're pricing it at what we're pricing it because there's so much gameplay in it. It honestly should fetch a $70 price point, but I think I don't really know what the price is right now, but I know it's probably more than $40 price point.
Interesting.
It is easily a $60 game. It's easily a $60 game.
Nice. Well, then I'm looking forward to picking it up. You guys should be just I don't know. Anyway, Miku has largely been seen on Sony platforms in the West, making Hatsune Miku Project Mirai DX a likely introductory game for a lot of people. How does Project Mirai compare to the Project Diva titles?
So I don't like to compare the two games very much because they're not. It's a little bit of apples and oranges. The only similarities are like the fact that it's Hatsune Miku and the fact that it's got a music rhythm game aspect to it. But the similarity is actually kind of in there. It's a new kind of game with a new visual style. If you like Vocaloid, you will love it. But it is kind of its own little thing, and so I don't really like to draw comparisons because I feel like it gives a false impression of like what the game is like.
Right. Do you have a personal favorite feature or song in the game?
Personal favorite feature. I really like how the way I consider Mirai DX to be. It's not just a rhythm game. It's almost like a companion app. So like when you sit it on the main screen. So let's say you're sitting on the main menu, right? They've got this thing. It's got this really interesting. So the character is on the top screen, walking around her little room that you've kind of designed for her. And the more you play the game, the more you spend with the character. They walk around. They get more animations. They get more actions. You can actually go into hangout mode. You can talk to them. You can give them treats, and they do all this sort of special stuff. And it's just much more. It's really interactive, and it's like one of those things you just kind of want to leave on your desk, like just sitting there running. because sometimes you look over, then the character's like doing something really random, really cute or whatever. Like you can put, for example, you could put a Virtua Fighter 2 console or arcade machine in their room, and your character will walk over and start playing fighting games or whatever. So there's a ton of stuff in there that's like that. I also really enjoy playing the new minigame, the new Mikuverse game. I'm a big Othello fan. I told you guys I used to work on cell phone games back like in the Razor days, and one of the games band I was publishing at the time was Othello. So I spent a lot of time playing Reverse against computers. So I really enjoy playing. Sometimes when I need to take a break at work, I just pick up and play Miku in a quick game of Mikuverse, and it's really great. And some people really like there's also Puyo Puyo in there as well. You can play either against a computer, or you can play a local player. So if you need to get your Puyo Puyo fix, Mirai DX is definitely the place to go to it. And of course, there's all the songs as well. I mean, there's literally there's 48 songs, 2 modes of play, and each mode has 3 different difficulties. So if you just need to get your fix on, you can do that. And also, actually, and speaking of probably the coolest feature, actually, when you think about features, there's a music player mode in it. Like you can open up this track list thing, and you can select the tracks you want. And when you start playing it, you can actually close your DS like you would sleep it. And as long as you have a headphone plugged in, it'll keep playing and it won't actually put to sleep. So you can actually use it as a music player.
Oh, that's really cool, because I do know some of the Sonic 3DS and DS titles do that, but I know some Nintendo titles that don't, and so that's Sega does. That's nice. I like when they do that, because I want to listen to the music. I'm not going to sit there with the 3DS open. Very cool. Yep. This isn't a question on the list. I just was curious, do the Japanese versions of the game, do they have any seasonal extras, things that pop up at certain times of the year? Yeah,
I mean, and all that's in the English version as well.
Okay, cool.
So all the events that'll pop up, it's very Japanese centric. So like come April, so as you may know, Gumi is actually present in the game, right? In all the other games, Gumi doesn't show up, but there are actually Gumi songs in this game. And Gumi comes and visits you every so often, depending on the season, and delivers items that are available for only a short amount of time. So, for example, just the other day, this week, I opened up my copy of the game, my test copy of the game, and lo and behold, Gumi shows up with some carp streamers, because May 5th is Boys' Day in Japan. And so on Boys' Day, on Kodomo no Hi, they put up these carp streamers in the neighborhood or whatever. So Gumi shows up and gives you carp streamers to decorate your room with during that time period. So all that stuff's in there.
That's cute. Is there the little cake with the strawberries on it? I always see those in games.
They will, you mean like a Christmas cake or like birthday cakes and all that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, very cool. I'm looking forward to that. Do you know the release date? It's nailed down? I don't have it in my notes here.
Stand by for that.
Okay.
All right. My question was going to be, can you briefly tell us other titles you worked on at Sega, and which one's your favorite title?
Oh, you can't ask me what my favorite title is. That's like asking me to choose which child is your favorite. Let's see what games have I worked on. So my first game at Sega was Sega's first Kinect title, a little game called Sonic Free Riders. That was interesting. I'd never worked on Kinect before. I'd never worked on a Sonic title before. That's actually not true. I did work on Sonic back when I was a Bandai, but that was really interesting. I worked on another game called Rise of Nightmares. It's a zombie punching game. Really interesting. What else have I worked on? I worked on Binary Domain. I worked on a lot of the, like I said, SVC3. I worked on what else? Lost World. I worked on Mario and Sonic London, the 3DS version. I worked on Rhythm Thief.
Wow.
What else?
I like all these games.
All the Miku games. All the Miku games are mine. All the 3D classics are mine. DFC is mine. Fighting Climax. What else? Am I missing anything? They all start to blend together after a while.
Yeah, Rise of Nightmares especially. That was a favorite of mine. It's a good Halloween game to dig out. Do you have any interesting stories from working on that?
I have tons of stories for Rise of Nightmares, but I'd actually have to sit down and try to dig them out of my memory. The thing that people don't realize about Rise of Nightmares, though, no one knows this, but that's actually a date game. People don't realize it, but Rise of Nightmares is a date game. You're supposed to play it with a girlfriend because what happens is seriously, like you invite someone over. It's kind of scary. It's physical. You both get kind of sweaty playing a little bit. It's good for laughs. You have a couple of drinks and play some Rise of Nightmares. It's actually supposed to be played with a girl who likes horror movies.
What is going on at SEGA of Japan then? Is this some sort of
Well, that game was actually was designed by some guys who have some arcade background. So it's got that it's built to have that sort of arcade play spans, like short little bursts, and there's a little bit of story thrown in there. It's supposed to be kind of relatively easy to play once you get the hang of it. It's a very interesting. That game is definitely easily one of the most interesting games I've ever worked on. There's just a lot of really weird stuff going on.
To my knowledge, it's one of the only free roaming Kinect games too.
Yeah, and I would there's a reason for that, because free roaming is really, really hard with Kinect, as it turns out. Sega, we were really trying to push the envelope on that one, and it's interesting. Like, the game is really, really fascinating. I'll be the first to admit that sometimes it doesn't. If you're not playing it right, it can be a little unwieldy to handle. But if you understand what the game is trying to do and what you need to do to play the game, it's really, really fascinating.
Of course.
It's a very Sega title.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's something I see with a lot of Kinect titles. People think it's virtual reality. It's not. The game's looking for certain movements. So if you're just wiggling around and running in place, Rise of Nightmares is not going to work for you. But if you learn step forward, step back, shift your shoulders, it's very cool once you get the controls down. I love the stand still and be quiet moments, because my wife came in the room and she's like, "What are you playing?" And I died.
So real.
I had to tell the house to be quiet. George, you had another question?
Oh yeah, can you give listeners advice on how to, if they're looking for a job in your field, how to land a job?
It's kind of tricky. I'm not gonna lie. Advice. It depends on what part. So I guess my advice is that the game industry is more than just game designers and programmers. There's a lot of different capacities for different people in the video game industry. Like, I myself, I have a background in computer science, and so I understand programming, but I don't program, and I don't design games either. But I do work on them. So it's more about, it's a lot of networking. Know what you want to do, and know that you can work in video games and not be a game designer. And just try it. Just know that it takes a little while it may take a while to kind of find your niche and find where to get into. I would say that it's also probably, at least in my experience, it's sometimes a little bit better to kind of go the small-time indie route rather than go for the big companies right out the door. Just because, when you go to a big company that has thousands of employees, that means that there's that many people trying to apply for that same job. So sometimes you need to build your resume a little bit before you try to jump into the big leagues.
Right, and I'd assume it's also important to put childhood biases aside. If you didn't grow up with, in your case, you didn't grow up with the Sega console, but you're working for them. So if you grew up disliking the PlayStation 2, thinking it killed the Dreamcast, don't let that affect your career moving forward.
I think if you're the type of person who has that sort of outlook on things, I don't know if you're gonna be able to cut it in the game industry anyway, because that's gonna inhibit you from working well with people with different opinions and different ideas on how to do stuff. Everyone in the industry everyone's super intelligent, everyone's super smart, and no one walks around hating other people. We're all just here to make games. It doesn't, doesn't matter if your shirt's red, white, or blue. I mean, just we're all on the same team, and we all just want to make it fun.
Nice. I like that. That's a touching note to end our interview on. George, did you have any additional questions?
Nope, that's it. Do you have any additional questions, Barry?
No, I feel at peace. I feel satisfied. This was a good interview. I want to thank Sam so much for talking with us. I know that there's a lot of transition going on at SEGA. I just wish everyone the best, as yourself. Hope everything goes smoothly. And looking forward to talking to you again in the future, and looking forward to all the games you have coming out with your name on them.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks again to Sam Mullen for joining us. Be on the lookout for upcoming 3D Classics titles. We have Thunderblade coming. We have the 3 aforementioned Genesis titles, Streets of Rage 2, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Gunstar Heroes. You can also find Sam and SEGA of America at MomoCon. That's happening May 28th to the 31st, 2015 in Atlanta, Georgia. So, yeah, make your way out there, say hi to him. And if you see Patrick, a.k.a. Corey Maru from SEGAbits walking around, say hello to him. Maybe you can get a picture with him or something. He's not really a celebrity, but we like to give him a big head.
You just take a picture with him and then email us the picture, or send it to us on Twitter. Right?
Exactly. So we have a contest here buried in this podcast, rewarding those who are listening. So if you are listening, you can enter this contest. It is Europe only, and the reason it's Europe only is because we have one code left over of 3D Fantasy Zone 2, which came out just recently. It's the latest title. And so the question I'm going to ask, and then you will email your answer, and I'll give you those details. The question is, Opa Opa, he appeared in several Fantasy Zone titles for the Sega Master System. I am looking for listeners to email me one title on the Master System that is not a Fantasy Zone game that Opa Opa made a cameo in. It doesn't need to be playable. It can just be a visual cameo. So what you do is you send an email to segabits@gmail.com, subject line podcast contest. It's a little rhymey, podcast contest. And in the body, really the only information you need to give us is the game, or one game that Opa Opa made a cameo in on the Master System. And there's more than one answer, so whoever answers a correct answer first will win a European code of the game, and we'll send that code over to you.
I just had to put in that game is pretty fantastic, so get on that.
Music is so good.
Yes.
So very good. So happy. I love cute 'em ups. I like the term cute 'em up.
I like the term too, but that game is very misleading in its looks. It's very hard.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the best ones are the ones that just kick your ass. They're so cute and adorable, but then, they leave your thumbs numb and swearing at the screen.
It's like a vicious, beautiful kitten.
Yeah. I've given a lot of the cute bosses the middle finger many a time. I found that's what I actually do. I give the TV or the console the middle finger after a certain amount of time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like throwing the 3DS, and I'm like, no, I paid money for this. It's not like I'm a kid anymore. I can just throw the controller. Now I'm like, that's $50 controller. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. I'll just, flipping off is a good substitute.
Someday you'll be rich and just have a basket full of 3DSs that you can just throw against the wall.
Oh, hopefully. I can't wait.
So that concludes this episode. I want to thank everyone for listening. We will be back sooner than later. I know it was a long break between this episode and our last episode with Greg Johnson of Toe Jam and Earl fame. So, George, I believe that's it. You want to say your goodbyes?
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. We love you. Thank you for listening. Right?
You got it.
I love you.
Let's play Rise of Nightmares together.
The SEGAbits Swingin Report Show is a production of SEGAbits. SEGAbits is a fan site that is not in any way officially affiliated with SEGA. Sonic the Hedgehog and all SEGA-related trademarks are copyright SEGA. All other featured trademarks are the property of their respective owners. Don't forget to check out SEGAbits.com, and you can find us on all major social networks. Just search SEGAbits.